Good evening and welcome. I'm William Kent Krueger, and I'd like to thank you for choosing to spend some time with me this evening. The first thing I'd like to do is thank the staff of the Kenton County Public Library for all the hard work they've done to make this event happen. Some of you may know that I was scheduled to be there in person last month, but the coronavirus, like so many, we've gone virtual. So welcome to my dining room. I'm going to talk this evening about the importance of books, particularly in the context of this crisis that we're all trying to survive. But before I do that, I'd like to tell you just a little bit more about myself and my work for those of you who may not be familiar with what it is that I do. I do publish under that very literary three-name thing, William Kent Krueger, but I go by Kent. So if we ever have a chance to talk in person or you want to send me an email, feel free to address me as Kent. I live in St. Paul, Minnesota. I have for the last 40 years with my wife of last March, 46 years. Our children are here. My grandson is here. I can't tell you enough how much I love living in St. Paul. Probably for the last many years, I was best known as the author of the Cork O'Connor mystery series. Oh, wait a minute. I was best known as the author of I love saying this, the New York Times best-selling Cork O'Connor mystery series, which is set up in Minnesota's Great North Woods. The protagonist of that series, Corcoran Liam O'Connor, is a man of mixed heritage. He's part Irish American and he's part Ojibwe, which is the largest tribal affiliation in northern Minnesota. Because of that mixture in his heritage, and largely because of the area in which I've chosen to set my work, a lot of the stories that I write come from issues that rise out of the interface of those two cultures, white and Ojibwe. There are 17 books in that series. I'm currently at work on number 18. It will be a novel called Lightning Strike. And because of the coronavirus, the release date has been delayed until the fall of 2021. But for everyone out there, I can assure you the wait is going to be worth it. So I want to talk about books this evening. Their importance to us, their importance to me, their importance to you, their importance to all of us. And I'm going to begin by offering a quote from another writer, a guy named Christopher Morley. And during the course of my remarks, I'm going to throw out quotes from a few other writers. And I do this for a couple of reasons. First of all, I think they've got some important things to say to us this evening. But the other reason I do it is, quite honestly, I've learned that if I quote smart people, it makes me look smart too. So this from Christopher Morley. Lord, when you sell a man a book, you don't just sell him 12 ounces of paper and ink and glue. You sell him a whole new life. Love and friendship and humor and ships at sea by night. There's all heaven and earth in a book, a real book. God, I love that quote. And what a great way to begin a discussion of the importance of books in our lives. Now, when I'm able to talk with people personally, I'll often ask them, what was that book that for you first opened your eyes to the world in a different way, which first showed you the true power that a story can have? And I love hearing what their responses are. Now, because we can't do that this evening, I'm going to tell you what that book was for me. It's kind of an odd book, but I think when I explain it to you, you'll understand its importance to me, particularly as a storyteller. So back in the early 1940s, my publisher, Simon & Schuster, began putting out a series of books that were meant for young readers. They were called Little Golden Books. You all remember Little Golden Books, right? There was one book in that series that was a particularly favorite one for me and my brothers and my sister. It was called The Happy Family. It was one of those books where the title said it all. It was about this impossibly happy family. There was a mother and a father, a little boy, a little girl. They had a cat and a dog. They lived in a suburban tract housing. They even drove, I swear to God, a station wagon. Now, in truth, not much happens in The Happy Family. There's a birthday party, and they hold the party in the backyard with a cake and everything. And a little bit later, they go to a beach outing. And about the most exciting thing that happens in the course of the whole story is Some ants try to get at the birthday cake in the backyard. In terms of what we think of as compelling plot, it's about as insipid as you could possibly get. So, why did my brothers and my sister and I clamor for our father to read that book to us night after night? Well, if he'd read it the way it was written, I know we'd have grown tired of it really quickly. But my father never did that. He would read the first few lines as they were written on the page, and then he would take off on his own, and God alone knew where we'd end up. So, for example, those ants that try to get at the birthday cake in the backyard, in my father's telling of the story, those weren't just regular ants. Those were giant ants. And they weren't just after the birthday cake. They were after the happy family. And that beach outing that they all go to where the waves lap gently against the shoreline. And my father's telling of that story, those weren't just regular waves. They were tidal waves. And they swept up the happy family. And the happy family had to fight for their lives. And my favorite part of the story always was the ending. The ending, as it's actually written, goes something like this. And Father turned out the lights and said, "Good night, sleep tight, don't let the bed bugs bite." My father never ended the story that way. In his telling, it would end something like this. And Father said, "Good night, sleep tight, don't let the bed bugs bite." But when he came to wake the children in the morning, the bed bugs had gobbled them all up. So what's my point? My point is simply this. That what I learned from my father's reading of that book, or maybe more appropriately, his non-reading of that book, was that a story once begun can go anywhere. You're limited only by the reach of your own imagination. Here's a quote from our Nobel laureate in literature, Toni Morrison. Toni Morrison says, "If there is a book you want to read, but it hasn't been written, then you must write it." Probably like a lot of you, I was blessed with parents who, when I was a kid, read to me. I never went down for a nap. I never went to bed at night without a story being read to me. So I grew up thinking of the world in terms of stories. And for whatever reason, I always wanted to be one of the storytellers. The first story I remember writing was a short story in the third grade. It was called The Walking Dictionary. Now I got to tell you this. My father was a high school English teacher, and he was always storming around the house ranting something like, "Nobody uses dictionaries enough. Nobody uses dictionaries enough." So in the third grade, I wrote a short story called The Walking Dictionary, which was in fact about a dictionary that didn't think it was being used enough. It magically sprouted legs so that it could toddle off into the world and go to the people that needed it. My third grade teacher went gaga over that story. My folks oohed and awed over that story. I swear to you, in the third grade, I knew I was going to be a writer. Here's another quote, one of my favorites. It's from humorist P.J. O'Rourke. P.J. O'Rourke advises, "You should always read something that if you die in the middle of it, will make you look good." I love that. So my high school English teaching father, despite the fact that he did his best to raise all of his children on literature with a capital L, I have always been particularly judicious in my own choice of reading material, and that was particularly true in my adolescence. That changed pretty dramatically the summer I was 12 years old. I was a Boy Scout then, and in that summer I decided it was time to get my Reading Merit Badge. Now, one of the requirements for the Reading Merit Badge, at least back then, was that you had to spend some time volunteering in your local library. So I was living in a little town in Ohio at that point. I went to the librarian and I made the arrangements, and when time came due, I showed up for my duty. Now, this was long before they had computerized check-in and check-out. Probably all of you who are my age, you remember that pocket thing that used to be glued inside the cover of every book, and it had a card inside, the check-in, check-out card. Well, what they did was they put me to work date stamping the returned books. So they gave me this black ink pad and a changeable rubber date stamp. And so for the first hour I was there, it was sort of ka-chunk, 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 ka-chunk. And after about an hour of that, the librarian walked my way and proceeded to ask me a very librarian-esque question. She said to me, "Kent, what do you like to read?" Well, the honest God truth was, I like to read comic books, but I didn't want to tell her that. So I briefly considered lying to her, but there was that whole scout is trustworthy thing going on. So I told her the truth. And without batting an eye, she said to me, "Have you ever read The Count of Monte Cristo?" I went home from the library that day with that great Dumas classic under my arm, and I came back a few days later and checked out The Three Musketeers. And after that, it was The Man in the Iron Mask. And when I'd read everything that our little library had by Dumas, I asked her, what should I read next? And she turned me on to H.G. Wells, and Jules Verne, and Arthur Conan Doyle, and Jack London, and Robert Louis Stevenson, and all these guys who wrote these stories that were perfect for capturing a boy's heart and a boy's imagination. I don't know how you folks think about your librarians, but I don't think about them as just those people who keep the books on the shelves in the right order and maybe give us a hard time when we return them late. I think of librarians in a very real way as important guides in our understanding of the world. And that's particularly true when we're children, and they point us toward the books that help us understand who we are and our place in the world. I think of libraries as the archives of our culture. I mean, these are the places that house the books that are so important to our understanding, to understanding who we were, where we came from, understanding who we are now, where we are now, and maybe even pointing the way toward the future, who we might become, and where we're going. When our libraries are gone and our librarians with them, there goes everything we are as a people. So I'd like to take a moment here just to say thank you to all of the librarians out there for all of the important work that you do on behalf of the rest of us, particularly in this time of crisis. Here's another quote, this one from another Nobel laureate, Albert Camus. Camus says, "Fiction is the lie through which we tell the truth." I love that. Fiction is the lie through which we tell the truth. Those of us who write stories because we write fiction are occasionally accused of writing lies. In my case, if it's true, I have to blame my parents, because when I was a kid, my parents encouraged me to write down my lies. So I grew up thinking of the world as this beautiful, enormous construct of imagination. The problem is that the older I got, the more I realized that the world of fiction and the real world don't really mirror each other very well. I mean, how often in real life is there a clear beginning or a clear middle or a clear ending to anything? And, you know, good luck making sense of it all. The world is simply chaos. We all know this. The world is chaos. But I think we're always looking for structure in our lives. I think we all hunger deeply for meaning. And I think that's where the true importance of stories comes into play. Because when we're in a book, when we're deep in a story, we're someplace that does make sense for a while. And we can survive all of this chaos. When we're in a story, that story oftentimes validates this sense that we have that our actions can actually have a positive effect in the world. In stories, this desire we have for wonderful outcomes is often realized. In stories, this deep hunger that we have for meaning is often satisfied. If it's true that I write lies, then I have to say this in my own defense. At the heart of those lies are truths that I come to believe in profoundly and that I try to reflect in my work. I believe, for example, that there are heroes in this world. There are people whose courageous words and courageous actions show the rest of us the way. And we're seeing that so often out there, particularly in our first responders. I believe that there is a moral compass, and most people around us every day are doing their best to follow it. I believe that when we make commitments to selfless, worthy causes and we stand by those commitments, we're better for it and the world is better for it. And maybe most important of all, I believe that despite all of the horrific images that are thrown at us by the media these days, despite all those horrific images, in the battle in this life between those things that are good and those things that aren't, the good continues to triumph. Here's the last quote I'm going to throw out for you this evening. It's one of my favorites, but it's not attributed to anybody, which is too bad because I so love the sentiment at the heart of this quote. Here it is. Anyone who says they have only one life to live must not know how to read a book. Isn't that great? Anyone who says they have only one life to live must not know how to read a book. Books, better than anything I can think of, give us a window on other lives, other cultures, other experiences, other perspectives. Books, better than anything I can think of, help guide us to an understanding of one another. Better than any sermon we're going to hear from a pulpit, better than any advice we got from our parents or that we're going to pass along to our children. Books help guide us to an understanding of what's best in each of us. When we read Thoreau and we spend some time with him there on the banks of Walden Pond, we're reminded of the necessity of finding quiet places in our own lives to help us contemplate life more deeply. When we stand beside Piggy and Ralph on an unnamed desert island in The Lord of the Flies and we face a horde of schoolboys painted like savages, we understand the brutality that's possible in a world where strength alone governs. When we sit beside Jem and Scout in the balcony of the Macomb County Courthouse and we listen to Atticus valiantly defend a black man accused of raping a white woman, we're encouraged in our own defense of those values that we believe are worth fighting for. And God bless Ogden Nash, who offered this sage advice on the wooing of a woman. Candy is dandy, but liquor is quicker. With his light verse, he gave us all permission to have a little fun along the way. But now we're being told that those books, those stories that have been so important to us all our lives are about to go the way of the dodo bird. A guy named Nicholas Carr a few years ago published a book called The Shallows. It was shortlisted for the Pulitzer Prize in nonfiction in that particular year. In The Shallows, Nicholas Carr throws out a lot of theses, but one of his theses is this. Nicholas Carr believes that the internet is actually changing the way our brains function because of the overwhelming amount of information that comes to us from the internet these days, and because of the way it comes in these bits and pieces. He believes our brains are having difficulty stepping away from all of that noise so that we can sink ourselves deeply into the reading and contemplation of a complex piece of writing. He backs up his contention with a lot of neuro and social psychological research. But for Nicholas Carr, the bottom line is this. If we keep going the way we're going, not only will we become uninterested in reading and thinking deeply, we'll become incapable of it. Oh my God, does that scare me? It scares me on so many levels. And one of the things that scares me most as a storyteller is that I'm afraid we're going to lose our appreciation of stories. Without stories to help us survive all of this chaos, without stories to help guide us to an understanding of what's best in ourselves, I'm really afraid about the kind of people we might become. I'm Methodist, which is neither here nor there. But on Sundays, when I used to go to church, can't do that right now, the coronavirus. But on Sundays when I used to go to church, I would sit up in the balcony for a couple of reasons. One is people, I had it to myself and people wouldn't bug me up there. But the other reason I did it is that if I sat up there, I didn't necessarily have to pay attention to the service, and I could, if I wanted to, myself over the contemplation of things, not necessarily of a spiritual nature. So it's sat there a while back, and I was thinking about all of those horrible predictions of Nicholas Carr, and I was trying to figure out what I could do, what we could do to prevent that. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, well, it was out of the blue because I wasn't paying any attention to this. Out of the blue, our minister thundered, "Go forth!" Scared the crap out of me. I still don't know what the particular context of that pronouncement was. But for me, it was sort of like the voice of God come down to give me some direction. Go forth, go forth. So if I had a message I wanted to leave you with this evening, it would be that. Go forth. Go forth and become the people you want to become. Forget about all those dire predictions of Nicholas Carr. Don't let circumstances dictate who you become. Take control of your circumstances. Do this. If you haven't already, do this. For at least 1 hour every day, shut off your computers and your televisions and your radios, all that electronic distraction, and give yourself over to the reading of a good book, the deep contemplation that may come from that. Help your children, your grandchildren, your nieces, your nephews become the best people they can become. Convince them every day for an hour to turn off their video games and their televisions and their iPods, iPads, and all of that electronic distraction, and read a book. I thought for a while that our children were hungry. Their souls were hungry. Our souls are hungry. And I think what we all hunger for is quiet. The kind of quiet that makes deep contemplation possible. The kind of quiet in which great stories can find a home. We have that kind of quiet now. It's possible. So this is my message to you this evening. Go forth into that quiet and use it. Go forth and feel. Thank you for listening. I hope something I said has some meaning for you. And again, I so appreciate the Kenton County Library and their staff for making this evening possible. All of you, I bid you good night. Stay safe, stay well, stay hopeful.